Tēnā koutou katoa, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou, ko Gregor Fountain tākua ngoa no Ngā Te Pākehā Hau, ko te Siritia Waitangi te Waka, ko Gregor Fountain tākua ngoa, ko te Aotearoa mahi ana Arono Sport New Zealand a hau, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. A huge welcome to everybody to the seminar, one in a series of seminars that we are hoping to lead this year from Sport New Zealand in conjunction with Te Hau Kori, which is a partnership that Sport New Zealand has with Victoria University here in Wellington. I'm going to start with karakia. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the structure for this morning's seminar and introduce you to some of the key participants. So please join me in karakia. Tu taua mai I runga, tu taua mai I raro, tu taua mai I roto, tu taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, kia tau ai te Māori ora. Tūtura whakamaua kia taina, haumie, huie, taikie. And a warm welcome again to those of you who have just joined us. We really appreciate your time. Through our registration list, it's really clear that we've got a wide range of people here from different parts of the sport and recreation sector and beyond in New Zealand. It's been great to see a large number of sports coaches, administrators, people that are involved in the governance of sport and physical activity organisations. Welcome also to students that are studying in a range of institutions throughout Aotearoa New Zealand, and the academics who run those courses for those students. And also welcome to our colleagues from government, so both from within Sport New Zealand, but also people that work in other parts of the public service. We really are delighted that you're interested in this topic, and we're really delighted that you're interested in this topic and that you are able to join us. And we understand that we also have some special guests, some family members of some presenters who have joined us today. So a warm New Zealand welcome to you. Kia ora, tēnā kōrua to both of you. As I said, this is a part of a series that Sport New Zealand and Te Hau Kori will be running this year and beyond, focusing on the role that play, active recreation, sport and physical activity more generally can play to different parts of our government's priorities. And today we're going to be focusing on the potential and the role that sport and physical activity can play within the justice system. And as I was thinking about this workshop this morning on my way into work, I remembered a short secondment I had a few years ago at the office of the Children's Commissioner here in Wellington. And at that stage, the Children's Commissioner was Judge Beecroft. He'd been the principal youth court judge before he became the Children's Commissioner. And he had a phrase that he used a lot. It was that a kid in sport stays out of court. And today we want to explore whether that saying is true. And we want to find out a little bit more about what the research says. And if it's true, how might we do this well? What does the sport and physical activity sector need to do? What does it need to be more deliberate about, I guess, in order to play a constructive role within this area and transform the lives of New Zealanders? In a moment, I'm going to pass over to our colleagues that have joined us to provide the main component of our presentation this morning. And I'll just talk a little bit about them. Then I'll pass over to him. Then our colleague Junior Armstrong is going to respond and provide a little bit more New Zealand context from what has been covered. So first of all, leading off this morning, Meredith Whitley will be presenting. She's a professor at Adelphi University in New York. She's also a research fellow at the Center of Sport Leadership at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Her research explores complex and multifaceted roles of sport in young people's lives, along with the interrelated systems impacting youth and community development. Recently, she served on the President's Council on Sport, Fitness and Nutrition Science, and she's currently leading the development of mental health guidelines for youth sport across the United States. Joining her is Kaylin McDonough-Smith. Kaylin is the assistant professor at the Center of Sport Leadership in Virginia Commonwealth University in the United States. Her research has focused on sport for social change, particularly with youth involved in the justice system. She's, like many of you, she continues to coach sport and be involved in physical activity programs, with her focus being particularly in juvenile facilities for the last 8 years. And then finally, we have Lauren Whitley, an assistant federal public defender based in Richmond, Virginia. Lauren's legal practice is focused on defense work in Virginia for almost 20 years. She's advocated for juvenile and adult clients charged with criminal offences at both the state and federal level. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou. Thank you to each of you for your willingness to speak to us today. And I will pass over to Meredith and stop sharing here so that she can share her screen and take us through the presentation that she's prepared.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We feel very grateful to be able to share with you and learn with you this evening. So thank you all for having us. And yeah, let us get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, make sure that everything looks all right as we get going. Wonderful. Just want to give maybe see a thumbs up from someone, make sure we're able to view the slides before I get started. Everything looked good? Thank you, Lauren. Fabulous. All right. So we just wanted to start today, Lauren and Kaylin and I, just recognize that we are joining you from the United States. Specifically, Kaylin and I are in Brooklyn, New York, and Southern Delaware. And these are both parts of the unceded homeland of the Lenape people. Lauren is joining from Richmond, Virginia, which is the traditional land of the Powhatan Chiefdom and the Monacan Nation. So first, we wanted to acknowledge today's Powhatan, Monacan, and Lenape communities. Second, we want to acknowledge our identities as white, able-bodied females from the States. We each have different experiences in the justice system, which some might call the prison system, which Lauren will be discussing later, and yet we recognize that this system privileges a number of our identities. And so this just for us reinforces the importance of continuous learning and ongoing collaboration with those who are marginalized and affected by the criminal justice system. So with that, to get us started, we thought we would begin tonight by first talking through the difference between traditional sport and sport for development. In traditional sports settings, the dominant focus is on the athlete's skills and performance. But in sport for development, this focus broadens to the whole people, the whole person, right? So this doesn't mean that we stop trying to help people get better at rugby or win a game, but we also want to try to help them learn specific life skills, process challenging situations, figure out what path they want to take in life, right? So we're trying to make them be happier, healthier people overall, as well as have fun and learn specific sport skills. And if we take that a step further, sport for development also focuses on how sport can positively affect communities, right? So it isn't just this individual focus, but it's also this broader community focus. Now, the next question is, what makes sport a unique and effective approach for personal and community development? So let's take a look at this brief video clip back in 2000, I believe it was.
Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination.
So with those words from Nelson Mandela, let's start to explore what is the power of sport? What is that value, right? So first, sport is highly valued in society, right? It has cultural, it has social significance. So when people are younger, they're often encouraged to get involved in sport, and they may feel as if their actions count. And this leads to a high number of young people playing sports, right? And often they're quite motivated to learn, to improve, and this makes them more open to learning and engaging in their own development, right? Since there's a focus in sports settings on how to learn and improve versus what to fix, right? What's wrong with them. So sports settings tend to be developmental. And so people have a chance to practice, to improve at something, feel confident, experience success. And this is called a mastery experience. When this is combined with competition, it can be incredibly powerful, right? And competition, we know it excites people, it draws people in. Now, this doesn't mean we should only focus on competition, but we shouldn't avoid it either. Meaningful learning can really take place in healthy competitive environments. Another reason that sport is a really powerful developmental setting for young people is the sense of belonging that can be cultivated, right? Meaningful relationships with coaches, teammates, along with a positive culture that helps young people feel safe, feel valued, feel connected. And last but not least, being active is a huge reason why sport has an impact. It's not only because of the physical health benefits, but the mental and emotional health benefits, reducing stress, reducing anxiety, expressing themselves, coping with our emotions. So these are some of the reasons why sport works. Now, the next question is, what parts of sport for development lead to the greatest impact, right? So there's two key pieces to this. First, if we focus on the coaches and mentors in programs, right, there's a need for strong, meaningful relationships with a focus on getting to know each athlete as a whole person, not just as an athlete, and really believing in them and their potential. Second, effective coaches and mentors are engaged in the program and invested in the youth. They're passionate, they consistently show up. They don't stand on the sidelines, right? They're engaged where they can be. And they don't stay silent as athletes go through life's ups and downs. They're really seeking out opportunities to have really meaningful conversations with young people and with anyone involved in the sport environment, and learning together and sharing together. And then this leads into the climate, right? So we think about the climate that should be created in sport for development programs. First, people must feel safe. They feel cared for, supported, not just by those who are leading the program, but those in the program with them. Second, there must be this person-centered philosophy, right? So this means adaptations to better meet people's needs, their interests, their suggestions, authentic leadership opportunities, meaningful choices, right? I talk to my students a lot about voice and choice, voice and choice. And then finally, effective sport for development programs create a task-oriented environment, right? So this means they value giving effort over winning. Winning certainly is part of the experience and should be celebrated, but overall there's a greater focus on personal improvement. Now, ultimately, sport for development programs must be carefully designed and implemented, right? This doesn't happen by chance. We can't hope that skills are developed, whether sport or life skills. Second, when possible, it needs to be integrated into the activities and games themselves, right? Kids know how, all of us know how to, check in and check out based on what we're interested in, and they're there to play sports. And so how can we integrate this learning into the sport itself? Third, we can't assume that the skills learned in sport for development programs automatically transfer to other parts of their lives. So we have to help people practice the skills they're learning and help them learn and improve from maybe what they tried to transfer between one practice and the next. And then finally, we have to recognize that simply teaching individual life skills or promoting personal development is not enough. People are living and growing in systems and structures that are inequitable and unjust. If sport for development programs don't work with others to try and change these broader concerns, we're not doing enough. We're just teaching kids, everyone, how to just survive amidst inequity. So why the justice system? I'm going to give kind of a little bit of basic intro and then shift over to Lauren, who's has a lot more experience in this area, given her area of work and expertise. But just first, why the justice system? Why are we focusing on that and the potential for sport? First, individuals who are more likely to become involved in the justice system have higher rates of physical and mental ill health. They have histories of victimization and trauma. Ethnic minority groups and socioeconomically disadvantaged groups are overrepresented in the justice system. There's limited healthcare that is available and delivered in the justice system, and so having access to that sport environment is incredibly important. And finally, there's limited positive engaging activities depending on where they happen to be located and residing. So that's some of the reasons why we strongly believe that the intersection of sport with the justice system can be incredibly powerful. So I'll hand it over to Lauren, who is going to take us on a little bit of a reflection before sharing.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. So I just want to start out by making sure, just because I'm not as familiar with other criminal systems outside the United States, but my role as a public defender, we represent a lot of juveniles and young adults because we represent folks who are charged with criminal offenses who can't afford an attorney. So juvenile court, juvenile adjudications are very familiar to us. And in the public defender community in the United States, we started using the language of the criminal system over the justice system because to our clients, the system is not just, it is not fair, and it should reflect the language we use should reflect as much as possible and validate their experiences in that system. So I'm going to use the language of the criminal system. Just one, it's kind of my default language in talking about systems with folks who are charged with crime. But Meredith was right to encourage me to explain that difference, just to kind of go through that. My kind of first piece here, and Meredith, if you don't mind just moving on to the next slide, is just to talk about, at least in the United States, how our criminal system defines youth or juvenile versus what we know to be true about what youth and juvenile and adolescence actually means. So in the United States, at the basic level, a juvenile is an individual who is alleged to have committed a criminal offense when they were under 18. So, for example, and I put in this slide, the United States Supreme Court has found about 20 years ago, not recently enough in my opinion, that it is unconstitutional to impose the death penalty on someone under the age of 18. Terrifyingly, that opinion was a 5-4 opinion, which means 4 of our 9 justices thought that it was appropriate to impose the death penalty on someone under 18. But luckily, that's the current state of our law. What's more complicated is that when we look at state by state, there are processes that allow children as young as 12 and technically younger than that, because there's no bare minimum age, to be what's called certified and tried as an adult. So in the United States, someone at the age of 12 can be charged with a criminal offense, certified, tried as an adult, and eventually sent to adult prison, which is pretty horrifying and devastating. What's complicated as well is that we've been making some progress, but it has been very slow to address the fact that 18 is just a societally made up kind of line in the sand that we have drawn to determine when we say that people are adults and when they're not. And what we know, even my limited exposure as a non-scientist, non-academic, is adolescence is a lot more complex than that and lasts a lot longer, especially for men, especially for different types of life experiences. In the federal system where I now practice, there is now required consideration at sentencing for an individual's age or youth. And there is an acceptance of it's even in the sentencing guidelines, the federal sentencing guidelines for the age crime curve. This idea that as you get older, you're much less likely to be involved in the criminal system, especially for young men, especially for particular types of crime, such as violent crime. The state system is a lot slower to catch up to that. There's still a lot of judges in juvenile courts who consider law and order to be the way it should be. You commit a crime, you go to jail. That's how the system works, even in our juvenile system, which is supposed to be rehabilitative. So having alternates, and this is why I'm very excited to be a part of a panel like this and to have this type of discussion, alternate diversion paths for vulnerable youth or for youth who may, kind of tiptoe into the criminal system, but we want to get on a different path and away from that cycle of reoffending is really exciting, because I think sport is a fantastic way to divert youth from that. But that's our basic definition, which is essentially, in the United States at least, we can try to make someone adult when we feel like it, and it's definitely something that we fight against every day in the public defender community.
All right. Such a devastating reality. Lauren, thank you for sharing that as we sort of set up this context. So I just want to provide an overview of what I'll be sharing in relation to sport as a preventative tool. So we'll talk first about some of that research of sport as a direct and an indirect protective factor, and what that really means as a protective factor, and the role that it plays in primary, secondary, and then tertiary prevention. So primary prevention really just being for all young people. How can we use sport as a way to support healthy development? Secondary prevention, if we have young people that might be deemed kind of quote unquote at risk, what are ways that sport can serve as a helpful support? And then later on in the presentation, tertiary prevention, which is really for young people who have become just as involved, ways to use sport to help them in desisting from crime moving forward. I'm going to talk about this sort of in the context of youth development, because it's so critical within this conversation. I'm going to talk about healing-centered sport, and then a little bit later in the presentation, I'm also going to highlight the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime has a Line Up, Live Up program, which is an evidence-informed sports-based life skills training curriculum. And I'll just talk a little bit about that. I want to provide some resources for those who might be interested in implementing this moving forward. Thanks, Meredith. So sport, as we know, has been a very popular tool when considering crime prevention. It's the reasons that we have webinars like this one. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what we know that relationship to be. Meredith has already outlined for us some of the how and the why of why sport is so powerful. And so building on this, sport has been found to have both an indirect and a direct role as a protective factor with implications for prevention. So a protective factor has been defined as a characteristic, a resource that reduces the likelihood of an adverse outcome or enhances an individual's ability to cope with a stress or adversity. So even if we can't remove that adversity, can we help provide individuals with skills to overcome that? Protective factors, they can be individual, they can be familial, community, or societal. So many of us have probably been fortunate to have a number of different protective factors. And what's promising is that collectively, all of us can work to build these really into the fabric of our communities and our larger society. So as I mentioned, sport itself has been identified as this sort of direct and indirect protective factor. So I'll give an example. The direct is a bit more straightforward. So individuals who are participating within a sports session, obviously they can't be two places at the same time. So it sort of diverts physically where they are related to delinquent behavior. But really what we talk about and we're more concerned with is those indirect factors, which Meredith highlighted. And so these are the benefits that sport has to psychosocial factors, opportunities for social learning, connections with positive role models, opportunities for self-efficacy. And these factors have been found to be really important for both prevention and desistance. So in thinking about sport as a tool for primary prevention, here really youth development, in order to understand this work, I think we need to position it within the context and think of it sort of holistically. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the youth development research, what's been found to be helpful in supporting young people in really being happy and healthy. So I'm going to highlight some of the literature in youth development. I know, as was mentioned in the beginning, that all of us are talking with people who are working with young people every day. So you really are the experts. And so hopefully some of this information just kind of confirm some of your perspectives. If it doesn't, let's talk about that as well, on what kids really need in order to grow and to thrive. And I'm going to talk about this from a really broad perspective, because obviously this varies from kid to kid, because every person is unique and there's really critical cultural implications as well. But on a whole, this is what has been outlined in the research. So positive youth development, oftentimes referred to as PYD, is a strengths-based theory of adolescent development. This asserts that all young people have the potential for healthy development and success over a lifetime. PYD supports that if young people with sort of our individual and inherent assets, you can see kind of in the middle here, if they have mutually beneficial relationships with their surrounding environment, that this can help to lead to healthy development and ultimately allow young people to contribute to their own lives, to their families, to their community, and our larger society. So these relationships, these sort of mutually beneficial relationships, these are with people and the spaces that young people are in every day. So this is with their guardians, this is with friends and peers, this is at school with teachers, mentors in the community, and of course, what we're here to talk about today, sports programs. These are, if these sort of environments are supportive, they can help in a young person's development, and oftentimes that's summarized as these 5 C's, which you can see here on the presentation. And Meredith, if you don't mind hitting the next slide, we of course know that not all young people get access to this type of supportive environment that really helps them to and nourishes them and their inherent assets. And actually, some young people are more at risk for having barriers, inequities to these developmental components, particularly youth who come from communities who have been made marginalized through colonization, through structural racism, oppression. And around the world, these are the same young people that tend to be disproportionately detained by our youth justice systems. And I just want to make a note here that this is not a remark on individual young people. This is not a remark on the communities that they come from. This is really calling out the systemic oppression and inequities that have reproduced these unequal resources for children. So not only are some young people not given access to these type of supportive environments, but they can be disproportionately exposed to traumatic experiences that can impact their healthy development. And this is so much so, the rates of childhood trauma are so high within the youth justice system that I think it also warrants a discussion here. And Meredith, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, thank you. So childhood trauma is considered a global public health issue because of its frequency, unfortunately, and this refers to stressful, dangerous, or life-threatening events which leave a child feeling overwhelmed or helpless. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, it's a group of potentially traumatic events that have been used to study childhood trauma. And you can see some of them here: violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home, growing up sometimes without a parent in the household, including incarceration. There's also been increasing work recognizing that ACEs can include experiences such as poverty, racism, colonization, and discrimination. Really important work to help us understand sort of the reach of ACEs. Unfortunately, if young people are not supported with adequate resources, these traumatic experiences can kind of bubble over into an intolerable level of stress for young people. And what we've seen is that this can impact their brain and their bodies. It can affect social, emotional, and cognitive development, and it can leave them at greater risk for a number of different health issues, but also leave them more at risk for justice involvement. And so if you move to the next slide, this means that collectively, we all need to work to build spaces of healing for young people who have experienced really high levels of stress, so that this doesn't bubble over into a damaging level. And this really can also be a tool for prevention. So what's encouraging, and as a sport researcher is really exciting, is that when constructed to do so, sport and physical activity are really uniquely positioned to support healing and provide a buffer against the negative effects of trauma. Specifically, it's a number of these things. It's supportive relationships, which we've already heard a lot about. It's a physical activity, that regulation of our bodies. It's predictable and manageable stress. So not necessarily no stress, that's actually not the goal, but sometimes those competitive environments allow that predictable, manageable stress and opportunities for competency and skill building. And that's what makes it such a valuable tool to support young people. If this resonates with you, the discussion on trauma, the discussion around sport as a space of healing. I will include in the chat a resource for the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport. We use, they have a playbook in relation to sport as a healing tool. I use it in the program that we run and with all of our graduate students, and it has been incredibly helpful. And I'll talk later a little bit more about UN's Office on Drug and Crime Prevention.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Kaylin and Lauren earlier. What I'm going to do now, we're going to shift into a focus on what happens when individuals then are incarcerated, so are in the justice system. In 2024, I was part of a research team that published an international consensus statement on the design, delivery, and evaluation of sport-based interventions aimed at promoting social, psychological, and physical well-being in prison. And so this you see here is the definition that we created for sport-based interventions in prisons. So these are intentional interventions that use sport to take steps towards addressing the structural position, social relationships, and physical and mental needs, health needs of groups experiencing multiple disadvantages in prison settings. And so after, you know, a lot of different research and shared learning together, this was the definition that we came up with based on literature and our own experiences and research in this setting. And so we also came up with 7 statements that can guide the design, the implementation, the evaluation of sport-based interventions in this setting, right? And so the first statement, and there are 3 phases to this. This first statement is focused on the design. And phase 1 is just at the start, really generating interest by choosing a sport that's popular, that's appealing, making sure that it's accessible, that it can give people a sense of control, right? Which is incredibly important in a setting where often that's taken away. That can provide either a distraction or release, and that's in a neutral and safe space where people can express themselves and kind of develop at their own pace. Then you get into the second phase, right? So this is as the intervention is getting going, the focus should be on relationship building between the program staff and the participants. You want there to be a foundation for additional support and personal development. Without those relationships, you're not going to be able to achieve much, right? They need to be trust-based. They need to help participants feel valued. They need to recognize the challenges that participants encounter every day. And then you enter into phase 3, and this is where you can also offer activities parallel to sport, right? So you have the sport, but then you also have the activities parallel to sport that are also promoting personal development, right? Helping participants acquire human capital, which I'll talk about a little more next, or psychological capital, right? Pro-social qualities like self-esteem, personal resilience, emotional control. But in terms of the human capital, it is focusing on, right, as well, not just helping the participants themselves develop human capital, but also those who are designing and delivering programs themselves. They need to have training in prison awareness, safeguarding, workplace and personal safety. This also means understanding the many forms of vulnerability that those in prison face and being sensitive to prison cultures and environments. There also needs to be a focus on inclusion, right? Participant inclusion. So making sure that programs are inclusive, they're designed to meet participants' needs. They're, you know, recognizing cultural, institutional, socioeconomic conditions. And really priority should be given to those struggling to cope with the carceral environment, right? Also those who don't have strong social connections or those who aren't physically active. And so think about how do you give priority to those groups so they can benefit because they might need the program more than others. And then finally, there needs to be a focus on sustainability and impact, making sure that the programs are sustainable, they have the potential for long-term impact, right? So you don't want, you know, if a program loses its initial funding or the program staff leave, you don't want things to end right there. You want to make sure that there's continuing program activities and health benefits for the participants who are taking part. So with that in mind, we're actually going to shift now from the focus on, we talked about prevention and we talked about during, while individuals are in the justice system. And now Lauren and then Kaylin as well are going to talk about the reoffending cycle and also how to prepare individuals for reentry. So I will hand it off to Lauren.
So I feel like I'm the big bad wolf on this panel because I just keep coming in and talking about how awful the criminal system is. But I think it just lays out the need for alternate solutions, right? And creative solutions and outside the box solutions, because clearly what we've been doing for, decades and decades does not work and does not help individuals or communities. So, the issue with juvenile criminal system involvement is once a juvenile becomes involved in the criminal system, kind of how I always frame it as it kind of gets its claws into you and it's hard to get out of it. So you inevitably, whether you go in front of a judge or in Virginia, sometimes you can be diverted. It's called diversion, where you end up on supervision or probation, but you don't technically go in front of a judge. You're going to be on probation. Once you're on probation, it is an additional obligation on both the child and the child's family, right? So most of the time, children don't have access to transportation or they're not driving yet. They have to go to probation meetings, drug tests, possibly therapy meetings that they may or may not be benefiting from. There's restitution, there's court costs, and it sets up juveniles who are making juvenile decisions that we all make as juveniles, missing curfew, missing school, participating in low-level drug, experimentation, underage possession of alcohol, just general juvenile shenanigans that have more intense collateral consequences for those children who are involved in the criminal system. And what's even worse is the impact for families that are already vulnerable is significantly higher. So for families that are struggling with economic instability, housing instability, folks who aren't working on a salaried job but have an hourly wage job whose boss is not going to let them take time off of work to take their child to a probation meeting, right? Who's not going to be able to get transportation to have someone else drive the child or to arrange some other type of alternative. You have families who are struggling with their own, parents who are struggling with their own active addiction, mental health consequences from mental health diagnoses, who are themselves involved in the criminal system, which is certainly challenging. Housing instability, like I said. So the impact is that you're on probation, you inevitably violate, you're reincarcerated. You're yanked from the stability of your community, if you had some, the stability of your education, your school system, if you had some, stability of school activities, such as sport or other activities that were giving you a sense of pride and self-worth, if you had some, and you're put back into a carceral environment where you don't know people and you're with strangers and you're having to establish your own safety and feel very unstable and unsafe from day to day. So it just is not set up for success. It is not set up to help people make better choices or divert their path. And I think what's most concerning is that it just really causes this cycle of reoffending. The other thing I just would point out that's really devastating as a, kind of an observer and obviously not someone directly impacted, is these children are coming back, when they come back into the court system, to have strangers, judges, prosecutors, probation officers, these strangers talk about them in these very, very awful ways, using awful terms about them when they're 14 and 15 and 16. And when you hear things over and over again, when you're a developing child, getting a sense of self-identity and sense of self, that's what you believe about yourself. And that happens every day in juvenile criminal courtrooms. So I think that to me is one of the biggest pieces of reoffending is, I have a docket right now of adults. Most of those adults are young men between the ages of 18 and 24. Most of them were involved in the juvenile system, and to read some of these reports, to read some of these things that were said about them in the juvenile system is pretty devastating. And I think that the next slide just also talks about what the criminal system just doesn't do, which we all know. I know it isn't really a brain breaker here, But as Meredith was talking about, some of the systemic issues that we see for folks coming into the criminal system, we're not talking about a juvenile criminal system that looks at these root causes of criminal choices or criminal behavior by juveniles. It's not providing safety. It's not providing stability, family stability, economic stability, community stability. It does the opposite. It's not providing long-term stable access to education or employment or other opportunities. And it absolutely doesn't even begin to reverse or try to even understand generational trauma or direct trauma to these children. It doesn't even begin to unpack what a lot of these children are living day to day, what their lives look like, what they're experiencing within their families and communities. So, thinking outside the box. And I will say there are a lot of, and I think Kaylin will probably speak to this too, there are a lot of system actors who do want to think outside the carceral box. They want to think of ways to help children, to help juveniles not be involved in the criminal system, or when they are involved, to be as productive as possible, which has not always been successful. So I think that's why this conversation is fantastic.
Great. So I just want to highlight really quick this curriculum, which I'll also put in the chat. I'm very active in the chat tonight. But and then I want to go back to Lauren's point around sport as a preventative tool in disrupting that cycle of reoffending, but particularly that last point she made, which I think is integral. So this resource from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime is called Line Up, Live Up program. It's an evidence-informed, sport-based life skills training curriculum that you can actually use as a part of an existing sports program, which I think is really nice in that design. So the curriculum focuses on individual life skills, but it also acknowledges, which I think we've sort of acknowledged across our presentation, that we really need to be mindful of community-based interventions as well, and targeting some of those risk factors that marginalize young people and then put certain young people at greater risk for justice involvement. And then if you don't mind hitting the next slide. Thanks, Meredith. So in terms of sport as a tool for tertiary prevention or young people that have already been involved in the system, we want to think about, well, I'm going to talk about it from more of an individual standpoint and some of the implications for programs. But as I said, to Lauren's discussion, it highlights that there's really critical implications for using sport as a tool for social justice, as a means to change kind of institutional systemic structures of inequality within our justice systems globally, and really work to address those root causes of reoffending. But I'll back it up and just say, from my standpoint, I'm going to talk a little bit more from that individual and programmatic perspective. So there has been a growing body of work exploring the role of sport programming and its impact on desistance from crime and helping people to kind of move out of crime. And we can see that there's kind of valuable influence that sport has on various factors that contribute to desistance. So for instance, sport programming that is designed to support the social emotional needs of participants. It links in with resettlement needs, things like education, employment. It helps to build strong working relationships and facilitate strong connections in the community. A lot of these are really common themes across our presentation, and I think that's valuable. So in terms of those facilitating strong community connections, I can say that of the prison-based sport programs that I've been a part of, the community connections, again, a personal perspective, I think are the most important and potentially the hardest to facilitate and follow up, but they're absolutely worth the effort as that bridge to the community really remains essential for young people returning home. I've seen this done in sort of several different ways. You can have a community organization that will partner with a youth justice center, and they'll be running programming, and that can be incredibly helpful in them kind of building those strong working relationships that we heard about, and getting to know the young people before they return home, and potentially serving as that connection point for them to continue playing in a community league, in a school league. When the sports program is run by the center, sort of in-house by staff, which is very, very common, we've at times invited like secondary school coaches to come into the facility to meet with young people who are preparing to leave. Although that might seem really basic, helping to sort of facilitate that introduction, it can work to break the ice and even break down some of those stereotypes. That can be really overwhelming for a young person to go out. Maybe it's a tryout, a community league, a school team, where maybe their reputation sort of precedes them. And so having that opportunity for both the coach and the young person to meet, to get to know each other on really an individual human level, we've seen that be helpful. And just a little bit further, in looking at key practice principles for supporting desistance, which have been outlined in the research, there's really valuable insights into how we can construct these sports programs to support conditions to really help youth be successful. And again, we've heard a number of these already. So recognizing and supporting individual agency and self-determination, and that could be having, youth who are assistant coaches, youth mentors, maybe they're choosing the program. An emphasis on relational practice. Again, I always talk again to our students, we could spend maybe all semester in the important role of relationships because this work is hard. And so developing strong, trusting relationships is really what helps all of us to kind of get through those challenges, those maybe steps backwards. Creating environments that are supportive of change. So helping young people to see those opportunities for employment, for education, social connection. I know this is probably a tired saying, but oftentimes I've heard young people talk about that they don't envision a life beyond 18, that they don't see that as a reality for themselves. And sadly, as I'm sure you're well aware of gun violence in the States, we have lost a lot of young people that have been in our sports programs. And so I think it's recognizing the reality of that for our kids, but then also what could life look like for them in regards to what they want to do with school and what they want to do with employment. Could there be something different? And lastly, that ties into this focus on hope and motivation. And so can we help with our young people to foster a sense of hope and motivation, helping them to envision a different future for themselves? So I think sort of in conclusion, this connection that sport has with critical supports in the community, in facilities, sport can be a really powerful tool within the justice system. And I'm really looking forward to Mr. Armstrong's insights as well within this New Zealand context and this opportunity for us to learn more about what this has looked like there.
Thank you so much, Kaylin. That was incredible, and Lauren as well. I think for now, we're just going to say thank you for listening. We're really excited now to listen ourselves and learn. And so I will stop sharing so that we can do so. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to each of you for such a comprehensive and relevant presentation, focusing on so many issues that have huge resonance to us here in New Zealand, and what really stood out for me in particular was that focus on positive youth development, the reminder about trauma, and the need to be intentional around this stuff. That sport doesn't just on its own, without a deliberate, explicit focus, do these things. We need to be, think really, really carefully and explicitly about how it needs to be different and what focus it needs to have. So thank you so much. We are aware that there will be some people that we've scheduled this call to go through to 11:15 this morning, but we know that some people will have 11 o'clock appointments. So we are recording this. So if you miss out on the chat, we may be able to give you access to that. If you'd like to use the chat function for any questions or responses, please feel free to do that. We'll do our best to get to those after Junior speaks, but I will pass over to Junior now. Junior is our colleague at Sport New Zealand. His role here is as the strategic lead for priority communities. Junior has an extensive background promoting and delivering sport and physical activity programs throughout a wide range of parts of the New Zealand community, including within the justice system. So we are really pleased, always love chatting to Junior, and really pleased that he has agreed to provide some New Zealand context and some response to what we've all heard. So over to you, Junior.
Kia ora Gregor. Kia ora I te whānau, ki te mea tuatahi, kei te mihi, ki ngā kai kōrero o tēnei wahi. First of all, just like to acknowledge our international expertise and the thoughts and insights shared with us this morning. Awesome to hear of, well, not awesome in a way, but awesome to hear about the body of knowledge and expertise that exists within the space across the world. And some of the messages definitely resonated with me. But thank you to our three speakers this morning, and look forward to building on the kōrero or the points covered within the presentation so far. In terms of ko waio, who am I? Thank you, Gregor, for the introduction. I te tātaku mama on my mum's side. I hail from the mighty Hawke's Bay, ko Kahurana ki te maunga, ko Pōkaua te awa, ko Kahurana ki te marae, ko Takitamu te Waka, ko Ngāti Kananu te iwi, ko Junior Timu Armstrong, taku ingoa. So mum's side's my Māori side, tangata whenua side, and my father's side is my Scottish side, Scottish heritage. So Armstrong connects me back to Scotland and also connects me to some of this mahi that we will be speaking about as well. I must acknowledge the whare that I'm in this morning. I'm currently in South Auckland in the BBM HQ whare, one of the many whare across New Zealand that serve our people and serve communities, and in special acknowledgement of Dave and his team. Dave was our New Zealand Local Hero of the Year winner in 2022, and I'm here on business connected to this mahi actually, and some of him and his team are currently out at Spring Hill Corrections Facility, facilitating one of their programs within the corrections facility there. So it's not lost on me, A, this kōrero, and B, the whare that I'm sitting in at the moment as well. I might just quickly touch on some of the points raised earlier that definitely resonate and that I will bring through my kōrero from my Aotearoa context. Mentioned positive youth development and the principles associated with that, and I can feel some people on this call with big grins on their faces when they hear positive youth development and its importance to this space. So that approach definitely resonates with us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also it's a difference between primary prevention and tertiary prevention, and where we might think about resource allocation and where we might make a difference based on, I guess, where we sit within our system here in Aotearoa, as well as obviously the value of sport, the role that plays for individuals and for community, but also the holistic nature of how that's delivered and how that's received by a young person or person within the system. And it's not just about sport for sport's sake, it is about sport for development's sake, and how it can play a role in really supporting positive pathways and futures for people. So in saying that, I might quickly touch on, Gregor touched on my role and what connects me to this mahi, but in terms of my personal connection to this role, I'm kind of conscious I'm speaking to kind of two audiences here, the audience in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and our international whānau as well. So I guess a little bit about how I connect to this kaupapa personally. For our international audience, here in New Zealand, we have some distinct groups that exist, i.e. gangs that exist. And I briefly mentioned my father, and my upbringing was really centered around one of our bigger gangs here in New Zealand, which is predominantly, the members are predominantly Māori and Pacific Island as we know it, but they started and originated in the 60s and 70s by males that were of lighter skin, blue eyes and blonde hair. And my father was involved in some of the groups that existed back in the original days. So he spent a lot of time and then through the justice system, start off his, I guess, education within Invercargill, Borstal, boys home down there, made his way through a variety of justice facilities here in New Zealand. And so my connection to this kaupapa obviously runs deeper than just the mahi that I do for Sport New Zealand. And saying that, on my mum's side, my Māori side, obviously got my good looks from mum's side. We have some senior leaders involved in the in the Manga mob here in back home in Hastings, Hawke's Bay. And so on mum's side, her brothers are I guess you'd call the presidents or the captains of the membership back in Hastings. And so on both sides of my whānau, our upbringing was centered around gang affiliation, drugs, violence, harm, both emotional, mental, physical, family harm, and obviously all the some of the characteristics that were described earlier around some of the risk factors that exist for children, young people in this space. But that wasn't our narrative. Our narrative is kind of what you see on the screen here. We, my brother and I, my older brother and I, we determined our path through sport. So sport was the vehicle that steered us away from the not so positive environment, and it allowed us to connect with people we otherwise wouldn't have connected with. And hand on heart can say that sport saved our lives and now provides us an opportunity to give back to the communities that we're serving. And so hopefully just, I guess, a little bit of context around how I connect to this kaupapa, and I guess the purpose and the drive that comes through the work that I do for Sport New Zealand at Te Hau Kori. In terms of what I'll cover off today, I'll speak a little bit about some of the characteristics of the young people at risk of offending here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, our mahi or Sport New Zealand's work that connects to this work, some of the characteristics of interventions that are making a difference, that are making a difference for young people on the coalface, as well as next actions or how we see ourselves within this space and the role that we can play moving forward. And so, funnily enough, obviously primary prevention and tertiary prevention was spoken about earlier. Here in New Zealand, we speak a lot about being at the top of the cliff and how we might support services that operate at the top of the cliff, but we also know that people do translate through and across the cliff, and how might we also spend time at that part of the system in terms of more targeted intervention to support those children, young people that require a lot more support and wraparound support to change their life trajectory and provide more positive pathways. So in terms of the young people here in New Zealand, so our most up-to-date data that we have from a collection of agencies showcases that obviously when we speak about the role of sport, we know that sport can support people to achieve their aspirations, i.e. win on the world stage and become the best that they can be. But we know that for many of our communities that having your physiological needs and your safety needs met is very much a day-to-day context and how they survive within the local communities and how they survive week to week, month to month is a real thing. And how might we, physical activity and sport, really think about that and acknowledge that and adapt our services to have the greatest impact for those that need it the most. So in terms of some of the characteristics that we really seen, school disengagement. So we've seen 75% of young people disengage from education, mainstream education, whether that be stand downs or continuous misbehavior. We are seeing our most at-risk young people disengaging from mainstream education. We're seeing low socioeconomic status, which was covered off earlier as well. 77% of young people at risk of offending were included in a benefit application in the last 5 years from their household, and around 79%, are living with an adult that have been supporting them with the benefit over the last 5 years as well. So low socioeconomic status and poverty is a key driver of some of the risk factors that we're seeing. Living with struggling adults. So we know that over half of young people at risk of offending live with an adult that has accessed mental health services within the last 5 years. And so we know that household safety and household needs are very different for our most at-risk youth that are most at risk of offending, and how that translates into abuse and neglect. And so within these households, we're seeing 87% of young people living with a person that has offended in the past or was subject of a report of offending. So we know that abuse and neglect within the household is one of the characteristics which is leading to a higher risk of offending. as well as vulnerability, and half of young people have accessed mental health services because of family violence in the previous 5 years. And so we've seen these indicators not just existing within one individual or two individuals. We've seen this across community, and we've seen poverty and socioeconomic status as a key driver of some of these risk factors that we really seen. Just want to touch on the transient nature of children, young people as well, and moving from households to households and communities to communities, and how might we factor that into intervention when we think about sport, physical activity, and the role that it plays directly with individuals and community. ADHD, alcohol fetal syndrome, methamphetamine, and drug use is a really big problem here in New Zealand and Aotearoa, alongside culture and identity. And I briefly heard colonisation mentioned earlier as well, and the long ongoing impact of colonisation and disconnection from identity and culture plays a big part as well in terms of children, young people, and their sense of belonging. Just want to quickly touch on the methamphetamine condition and what we're seeing here in New Zealand, and we would have seen over the past few days that methamphetamine use has doubled over the last 12 months in our communities. And so the wastewater is telling us that methamphetamine use is doubling. And what does that mean for children, young people, adults, households that are already struggling due to poverty? But then we have the exasperation of the impact of drugs and alcohol and violence, and what does that look like for the communities that we're serving, let alone once we start to cascade off and think about sport, physical activity, the role that it plays. We must truly understand the communities that we're serving and some of the socio factors that really deeply impact on the people that we're serving. What does this mean for Te Hau Kori? So we have a national relationship with Oranga Tamariki, our Children's Commission, long-standing relationship with them. An MOU was signed in 2019, and some deep dives and some more close connections created based off that MOU over the past 5 or 6 years. And I'm conscious there's probably some people on the call that have been a part of that. So acknowledge some of the work that's happened in Ōtautahi Christchurch and some of the mahi of others that have contributed to Oranga Tamariki relationship. New Zealand Police, so we have a really strong relationship with New Zealand Police, and the middle photo is of a handsome man, Don, based in Eastern Bay of Plenty. He's the gang liaison officer within Eastern Bay of Plenty, and is the premier rugby coach for the local rugby team as well. So obviously sport plays a big part in his relationships and the mahi that he does for his communities within Eastern Bay of Plenty. And the Department of Corrections, obviously a big, I guess, partner in terms of how we think about young people within corrections facilities and within their care. And so over the past 4 years, we've had really good relationships with the National Youth Team and prototyped and delivered targeted interventions within rangatahi units here in Aotearoa, and have learnt some really beneficial intel around how that might look within the more, I guess, confined spaces of corrections facilities, but then also the more unique spaces of corrections facilities and what can and can't happen within those spaces. So we have really strong relationships at a national level. What that looks like through, I guess, a community-wide approach. Here in Aotearoa, we have really strong partnerships with our regional sports trusts, who are closer to the coalface, much more closer to the coalface in Sport New Zealand. And through our regional sports trust, they have identified 91 communities that they will focus in on over the next 2 to 3 years of partnerships investment, and with a key focus on equity and how inequitable conditions really drive lower levels of physical activity. And we know when we start to raise up and think about equity, we start to think about, and we can see some really strong relationships between some of the communities that exist where you think about some of the characteristics I touched on around children, young people that lead to higher risk of offending, we start to see the mapping of communities where some of these characteristics exist, and how do we think about a whole of community approach within this context. So not just the school, but thinking about the school, primary, secondary schools, kura, thinking about local providers that exist within the community, the spaces and places that exist within the community, and how are they conducive to positive physical activity experiences, better relationships between local providers and stakeholders, from more central government agencies and some of the investments that exist through Ministry of Social Development, Department of Internal Affairs, how that lands on the ground, and how we're better connecting on the coalface around creating better equitable conditions for physical activity to occur. So we do have a explicit community-wide approach here in Aotearoa, which we will see, I guess, from a primary prevention perspective, start to think about more longer-term system change within local communities, and how physical activity and sport is integrated into all facets of those local communities over time. Tū Manawa Active Aotearoa is our activation fund. And this is a fund that is, again, distributed by Regional Sports Trust to the level of 16 million per year. And we know that through the activation fund, local providers that really give effect to more targeted intervention are accessing this fund and delivering meaningful cope-up and programs that are making a difference for children and young people on all ends of the spectrum, from those that are involved in communities where there's higher risk of antisocial behaviour, versus those that have offended and are looking at how they might reintegrate back into community. And so a couple of examples of some of our local providers that have access to Manawa. We've got Shamrock Boxing, another local community champion that's doing some good mahi in Maraenui, Hawke's Bay. We've got the Back in the Game project alongside New Zealand Police and Active, a partnership in Auckland, and working alongside the multidisciplinary approach to integration of young people from YJ back into community, and how they access physical activity and sport. And we've got Tū Taniwha, a kaupapa that is in Murupara, an isolated part of Eastern Bay of Plenty, that was originally started by a teacher who left his job because he saw and noticed a methamphetamine problem amongst children and young people, and thought we need to be better, and so created an exercise kaupapa to really address that issue in Murupara. So those local providers are accessing Tū Manawa and being able to deliver directly to children and young people in their communities. We are also working alongside groups of champions across New Zealand, and I'm always conscious when you have some logos on the screen, there are many more champions than just those logos on the screen. So acknowledge that if we started to list them all, we'd be here all morning. But we are working with some organisations that exist really to serve children, young people in this space, and how might we develop better body of knowledge from Aotearoa New Zealand context around evidence of what works, and some of the learned lessons of the social enterprises that have been started up, and how might we share and scale the impact that they have across Aotearoa New Zealand, and support a more collective network, working better together around collective outcomes within this space. So very early stages, but we're working with leaders within this space to really develop and champion that initiative. Characteristics of interventions at work, conscious of time, just got the 5-minute bell pop up on screen, but characteristics of some of the interventions at work in terms of my mahi and what I notice and observe across New Zealand Aotearoa is definitely having right people and a multi-agency approach. When I say right people, it's not just the right people delivering directly to children, young people, it's right people in different spaces of the system that really believe in the power of physical activity and sport, and can leverage their skills and opportunities to make a difference for those that are serving children, young people within communities. So they usually have big hearts, and they usually believe in the potential of young people and the potential of this kaupapa, physical activity and sport. Culture and mātauranga Māori. is an integral part of the kaupapa, so reconnecting the disconnected back to culture. And I'll acknowledge a wise person who quoted this, but culture is part of the cure. And how do we reconnect young people that have been disconnected from culture back to culture and start to embody the values, the principles of tangata whenua or te ao Māori perspective into young people's lives through physical activity and sport. And we know that that works. Positive youth development principles that's been spoken about. I didn't just put that in there just for clarity. That was there last night. I'm wraparound focused, so thinking about the young person, not just the physical realm of the young person, thinking about mental well-being, emotional well-being, social well-being, their whānau, spiritual, and how does physical activity and sport play a critical part in that, but also other services that exist, i.e. alternate education, into employment, life navigation, mentorship, those types of holistic approaches that really support the overall development of a child and a young person, and longer term support. So investing in programs that will be around for a while, that have stood the test of time, because we know that we're thinking about some real stubborn characteristics that exist. So we need interventions and champions to really be around longer term, as opposed to short-term investment and redirecting investment elsewhere. We know that to really truly make a difference, we need to be supporting the young person longer than others. The difference being made, some of the difference that's been made across New Zealand, Aotearoa. So this group, Live for More, they use surf therapy as a vehicle of physical activity to engage with their young people. Just spent the weekend with them and some of the amazing humans that exist for Live for More. But they are really making a difference through surf therapy. That's their vehicle. That's the gift that they have. They're changing the lives of the young people that they're serving, and they're doing it in a way that makes the most sense for their context. And this is just one example of one of the young people that of their lives that they've changed, and the value that they're adding, and how they're supporting them to live free from gangs, live free from crime, live free from drugs, and how the more extensive wraparound support holistic approach is really making a difference for the people that they're serving. So that's more of a, I guess, a qualitative, a young person's view on the impact. We're also seeing our champions collect data and information at an individual level. And so this is a snapshot from an app that's been developed by one of our leaders in this space. And this is a snapshot of a young person's input into that app around their mental, social, and physical health, well-being, when they engage with the program and when they're not engaging with the program. And so we're starting to see some really qualitative and quantitative data come through around the impact that's been made at a local level, and how our champions are collecting that data and telling that story to the people that make the decisions. Actions. I haven't really touched on the 9 government targets, but we know that within the current 9 government targets that this work exists. So we think about reducing child and youth offending, target number 3, reduce violent crime, as well as increasing student attendance at schools and kura. We know that if we can, that we have a role, to really support those targets of current government, and how might we work better collectively to achieve that. So in terms of actions over the next foreseeable future, continue to build the value and the body of evidence that makes a difference in Aotearoa. So acknowledge the international context we've heard. Aotearoa, New Zealand, our context around colonisation and the impact that that's had on tangata whenua, and our diversity that exists in terms of the cultures that live here. We need to continue to build the value, but more so build the body of evidence of what's making a difference and how it's making a difference. Strong relationships and connections between government agencies and local providers and everyone in between. This is a collective effort. It's a complex issue. Every organisation has something of value to add to the conversation and to the kaupapa, and we need really strong relationships and connections across government agencies, across tangata whenua or iwi, hapu, marae, local providers, NGOs, charities that exist that play a part. We need really strong nationally supported but locally driven relationships and connections in this space. We need to capture effective practice of what's making a difference and sharing this more widely across communities, as well as Aotearoa, as well as staying up with some of the behavioural trends that are coming through, some of the characteristics I mentioned earlier, really understanding the impact that that's having on children, young people now and into the future, and how we need to respond through physical activity and sport to meet those demands, and continued support of initiatives that are making a difference and work. We know that some of the champions that have been around, they've been around for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We need to continue to invest in what's working. There is, I guess, a risk of pulling investment and investing elsewhere because that initiative is sustainable. We need to continue to invest in what's working and support what's working and share what's working with those wider and other communities as well. I'm conscious that Gregor's taken his camera off, so I think that's the cue for me to wrap up. Again, just want to thank our international speakers for sharing your body of knowledge and expertise in this space, and Te Hau Kori and Sport New Zealand for hosting this meaningful kōrero. Hopefully it's the one of many and it continues now and into the future. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Junior. Thank you so much, as always. Yeah, inspiring and comprehensive, as always. So yeah, really amazingly well done. Look, we're conscious that we would have loved to have had time for conversation, and we don't want to. We are going to end now because we've said we will, but we do want this conversation to continue, and we'd encourage people throughout the day to continue to use the chat if you have reflections or thoughts, or to get in touch with Junior or me or Justin or others, John, others that are involved in this work, to make connections and have coffees and continue to talk about what we can do collectively in this space. We'd love to hear your reckons, your thoughts, your ideas at whatever level of the system that you're working at, so that we can build a community, build a stronger community around this stuff. Because as Junior said, it's such a multifaceted, multi-layered connections that we need. So thank you again to our presenters, both from Aotearoa and from the United States. We really appreciate your time, your commitment to this, and your expertise. I will close with karakia and wish you all really well for the day ahead, or the night ahead, as it is for some of you. Kia whakairia te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia tūriki whakataha ai, kia tūriki whakataha ai, haumie huie tai ki e. Ka kite, thank you everybody. Take care and keep in touch.